Be a person who looks at poems and wonders, what are poems about? Even like what's happening in a poem? Why does it feel like a puzzle? It feels like a mystery. I don't know how to solve it and things like that. Or maybe you just love poetry analysis. Well, for the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, we are going to satisfy answers to those questions or just your itch for poetry by digging into a poem by J to the lead. This poem is going to reveal to us what many other poems do, because what a lot of poems are doing is using a similar sort of pattern. And if you know what the pattern is, then you can find out what a poem is actually about relatively quickly. To guide us in this process, hello guys, my name is Jeff. It rhymes with breath, which I encourage everyone to do. Slow down, take a moment to dive into your poems and see what exactly is happening. We're going to be taking a look at, again, a piece by J to the lead. This poem is entitled Reflections, and this is your latest episode of our poetry analysis show, which happens every Sunday at 9 p.m., called Fine Print. All right, guys, we are going to be taking a look at a piece. Sorry, just had to check the audio for one thing. This piece, again, is called, I don't know if I actually revealed what the piece is called. It's called Reflecting. So we're just going to do a quick read through of it before we dive in. Just a note that this is not an analysis. Well, this is an analysis show. This is not a workshopping show. So we're not here to edit. We're just here to see what is actually going on in the poem. This is not a place, though, for suggestions and reworking pieces and things like that. Reflecting. I watched you fall apart in front of my eyes the way your mirror did when it fell from the wall without a single touch, just me pulling too hard at the curtains on the windows, the force rippling through the frame as the wire clung to the nail for dear hope. It is in times like these we cannot help but to self reflect. So no wonder you shattered into a million pieces when things came crashing down. How else could you see yourself if not broken? And I, incompetent at best, thinking I could make it right, only managed to cut myself in the process, walking through shards, barefoot in the dark, wrapping my hands around every jagged piece. I love you still. Thank you again to Jay to the Lee for allowing us to dive into this piece. So, one of the first concepts that I think is important to look for in poems, this is especially going to be true for poems you find in your academic journals, especially, is the formula that typically happens is you have your entry into the poem, some sort of vehicle to get to what the poem really is going to focus on. And then at some point, usually around 2/3 of the way down, you get what's called your turn. And this is where the change happens, typically to your speaker, where your speaker or the way your poem was set up at the beginning is no longer true. There's a giant change that occurs, and I think that this poem is kind of falling into that. And in fact, you kind of see, I think, right around this moment around here is where we get our turn. And turns oftentimes indicate themselves with transition words or points of grammar and things like that. And we kind of get that sort of thing happening as well. We get this, and I. So we have a shift back to the I, because originally you look at what was happening before. So you have this moment here. You have this kind of like this moment of introspection and things like that. You have this like we going on times like this that we cannot help to self reflect. Feels like one of those moments where we use we, but it's not really we, right? It's really more I. uh, in a lot of ways. And then in the beginning, we have our entry, like our vehicle into the poem. So to me, I imagine it seems like our turn is going to be somewhere around here. Okay. Not every poem has a turn necessarily, but again, a lot of poems that you're going to see in your academic journals, like your poetry mags, your 32 review, your American Poetry Review, things like that, you can expect a turn somewhere pretty predictably in this area. And it makes sense, right? Because if your turn's too soon, you haven't had enough time to kind of really justify it. If your turn's too late, you don't have enough time to develop it. If it's right in the middle, that's a little bit too predictable, ironically, in a lot of ways. So what ends up happening is it kind of ends up falling into the final third of the piece in a lot of cases. So that knowing that, if you know what the turn is, what that lets you do is it lets you begin to be like, all right, how do I, if I never read a poem before and I want to find out what it's about, that can be the moment to really kind of dig in. So that's the first place where I would look to discover what is the poem actually trying to say. Most likely it's going to be happening sometime around there. Another place that can be helpful for determining what the poem is about. A lot of times the beginning isn't great for knowing what the poem's actually going to be because the beginning is just going to be what's kind of the vehicle that's going to lead to our moment of reflection because so much of poetry is about a moment, a situation, an object, something that inspires deeper meditation. And typically that's going to occur, like the introduction of whatever that moment or that item is typically going to occur in your opening. And in fact, that's what we have here as well, right? It's like I watched you fall apart the way your mirror did. So this moment about the mirror is pretty key, right? The way your mirror did when it fell from the wall without a single touch. Okay, this is kind of the central action. Okay. It's not necessarily the same thing as happened in the first two lines. The first two lines saying, I watched you fall apart from my eyes. So this is going to be the backdrop. I watched you fall in front of my eyes, fall apart in front of my eyes. So this is going to be the thing that's going to stay in the back of the mind. This is going to be kind of like I'll put like kind of like the background thought. This is the situation that the poem in a lot of ways is really trying to keep in mind, right? But then as soon as we establish that, we make a comparison to a scene that's going to kind of capture the majority of the poem. The majority of the poem is going to center on this idea of a specific action, the mirror falling. So the background of this, the thing that's kind of the undercurrent of the whole poem is that you have a speaker who watched someone fall apart. Basically, that's coloring everything throughout this piece. And then the central image that we're going to do to convey that is this idea of the mirror. Because basically, what are the things that are talking about the mirror? The way your mirror did. Mirror when it fell from the wall. Mirror without a single touch. The mirror. Just me pulling too hard at the curtains on the windows. The mirror. The force rippling through the frame. The mirror as the wire clung to the nail for dear hope. Mirror. So all of this, this huge sequence is in reference back to the mirror. All of this is a reference back to the mirror. Okay. Once you have that action, or kind of that scene, that central image, kind of the vehicle that's been moving the poem forward, in this case is that the mirror, what often happens is then you have your moment of introspection. The meditation arrives. It's in times like these we cannot help to self-reflect. So no wonder you shattered into a million pieces when things came crashing down. How else could you see yourself if not broken? Okay, so this is our moment of, again, I'll say it's like kind of like introspection on part of the speaker. This is where time kind of freezes and it's just the speaker thinking about things. It's your moment of introspection here. And then once we finish with the introspection, then we get the speaker's thinking about things, and then we get the transformation. What's our transformation? Right here. Thinking I could make it right, I only managed to cut myself. What have we learned? The speaker trying to help, the you trying to help, the mirror ends up injuring themselves. So much of the piece has been kind of about the you in a lot of ways. And now the speaker is actually, in some ways the speaker was complicit in the harm, and now the speaker actually gets harmed as well. Because the speaker hurt the mirror, or dropped the mirror. In a sense, pulling too hard at the curtain. So it was even that was indirect, right? Okay. But even though the speaker has harmed themselves, they love the you still. So in this case, this is the moment where the speaker gets harmed. And they have to make a choice. Do they kind of run away from the you? What do they do with the you? And what do they choose? They choose to continue loving. So that's kind of your general progression and movement through the piece. Okay, we have the background information. I watched you fall apart. We have the vehicle to kind of capture the tension that's happening. The mirror fell. We had that moment of reflection. To be like, man, this reminds me of those times, we can't help but self-reflect. And then we have the final shift where the speaker actually ends up being harmed as well. Okay, so that's kind of your general progression that's happening here. I want to do just kind of a quick line-by-line analysis, but hopefully, again, when you're approaching poems, hopefully this gives you an idea of the kind of the things to look for. So maybe starting off with an idea that's going to flavor the rest of the poem, then having some sort of central vehicle that's going to move the poem forward, then having a moment of reflection or something like that, and then having a transformation where the speaker changes or the poem changes in some way, probably happening again in the final third of the piece. That's a very standard formula for a lot of poems. All right. Having said all that, let's do just a real quick line by line. Because I do think there's some moments where I'm kind of getting a little bit caught. But maybe you're not. Maybe you can guide me. So if you have any suggestions or things you can do to help me, please feel free. Leave them in the comments. Or if you're here with me live, put them in chat. I watched you fall apart in front of my eyes. Okay. Just a final note, too, in case for those of you interested in publication, or maybe you're new to publication, or maybe you're facing like rejections, you're like, man, why is this happening? Just never forget the key moments of a poem. The key, most important moments of a poem are going to be your title, your first line, and your last line. Okay, those are always going to be the first places, for instance, like an editor is going to be looking at. Okay, and if you're not hitting those areas, even if the middle is good, you're still making the decision very difficult for the editor, because the editor has to hope that people don't just skip poems, because people a lot of times are looking at those first moments and they're making a decision, do I want to read the rest of this piece or not? And so if any of those moments aren't quite working, it may cause a reader just to not read through the whole piece, and that's not what you want from an editor's perspective. And editors can find it too. They have all kinds like heat maps and things like that for especially for online editions and things like that. If they're even just a little bit savvy, with like marketing and things like that. So they can see where people are spending the most time. And so if they're noticing that people are skipping your poem, that's not going to be good for you. Okay. Just a quick hello to Joshua. Also, happy birthday. Well, they celebrated their birthday over there. I forget if it was today or sometime this week, but happy birthday. So, one thing when I'm looking at this, I watched you fall apart. I do kind of wonder. There may be moments in this other lines in here that maybe um stand out that might be stronger for a first line potentially. Just something to kind of keep in mind because I think there are other images that might be a little bit more striking. I watched you fall apart in front of my eyes, the way your mirror did. I watched you fall apart. Okay, so again, just a quick line by line. I watched you fall apart. Okay, so you have a speaker and you have a you. And then in front of my eyes. So this is happening. The speaker is there. The other person is there. You imagine it seems like they're sharing a space physically. Okay. By the way, for those of you interested in learning how to navigate the space with characters, there's a book called The Art of Subtext, which we've mentioned before. I believe the author of that book is Charles Baxter. And it's really designed, I would say, a little bit more for probably fiction, prose. But there's lots of things you can take, even if you're a poet. And one of the things that Charles spends a lot of time looking at is characters and scenes involving characters in kind of confined spaces. And that can add a lot of tension to pieces as characters are really trying to navigate these limited areas and things like that, in addition to other things that are happening in their relationship or in their lives. So it's definitely a read I would recommend. I think it's a good one. I watched you fall apart in front of my eyes. Okay, so I'm in this scene. I'm here. I'm going to call this like scene 1. We're in scene 1. I watched you fall apart in front of my eyes. The way your mirror did. Now I feel like I'm entering scene 2. When it fell from the wall without a single touch, just me. So I'm going to put, this feels like to me we're reflecting back. Single touch, just me, pulling too hard at the curtains on the windows. The force rippling through the frame as the wire clung to the nail for dear hope. This scene too is getting a ton of info, right? Lots and lots of rich detail. Josh was saying, added to the read list. This is a good one. Let me know your thoughts when you read it. I have a notebook on like all the notes I took from it that I need to make into a video. Anyways. As the wire clung to the nail for dear hope. Okay, so I will call this scene 2. We have scene 1 and watch you fall apart in front of my eyes. Scene 2, we had this mirror scene where the mirror fell. Then we have this next one. Is in times like these. I think this is back in reference to scene 1. I think this is back in reference to scene 1. And I, incompetent at best, think I can make it right, only managed to cut myself in the process. Okay. And then it's almost like the scenes kind of merge, right? This almost seems like a mix of 1 and 2. Right, and I, incompetent, best thing I can make it right, only managed to cut myself in the process, walking through shards barefoot in the dark, wrapping my hands around every jagged piece. It could be literal references to the mirror, or it could be just kind of a metaphor capturing the scene going on. So one of the questions I kind of have going through this, and let me know if you're tracking what I'm saying, or if I'm just like, Jeff, you're crazy, or this doesn't make any sense. Scene 2 gets a lot of really rich, specific detail. I'm really there. It fell from the wall without a touch. just me pulling too hard at the curtains on the windows. I'm there, just having, just like having moved before, having just lived in apartments and houses, where like, you're in one end of the room doing something, making adjustments, and then something on the other end of the room it falls down or something as a consequence. I'm there. I'm with it. Really rich. Um, and then, but the scenes for one are so cerebral, and I'm also not really permitted entry from a reader's perspective. Okay. I watched you fall apart. What does that even mean? You know what I mean? Like, I watched you fall apart. That's the, when you say like the mirror fell from the wall without a touch, just me pulling too hard at the curtains. I can imagine that. It's very tangible. But saying that I watched you fall apart, we stay really, really abstract. So it's a little bit harder for me. So I'm going to say this is really abstract. Whereas this middle section is really, really concrete. And then when we go back to the kind of the straight scene one, is in times like these. Times like what? Times like what? That's a question I have. Times like what? We cannot help to self-reflect. Why are we jumping to we? So we have a pronoun shift. And again, I'm trying not to approach this from a workshop perspective, but these are just kind of questions I have when I'm reading through the piece. So we have a pronoun shift here. So now we're going to the universal to the grand, which again, stuff that we mentioned earlier. A lot of times when we switch when we switch pronouns, we switch to we, it's not really we, right? It's really me and things like that. Joshua, I appreciate you saying they're tracking and agreeing with the breakdown so far. Okay, cool. That's not just me here. It's in times like these, we cannot help but to self-reflect. Because it's almost also a projection too, right? Because we're assuming that when we say is in times like these, we cannot help but to self-reflect. So it's almost like the speaker projecting the fact that, oh, I'm reflecting, so everyone else would reflect too. So this is something we're all in this together, right? But are we? Or are you just assuming I'm with you? You know what I mean? At times like these, we cannot help but to self-reflect. And these sorts of statements are kind of tricky because it almost gets into like slippery slope territory. This is a big statement. You're saying is in times like these, we cannot help but self-reflect. That's a very strong statement to make. You're saying you have to self-reflect in this moment. There is no other option. You have to. You must. You simply must. It's like, well, wait a minute. What if I don't? But instead of explaining that more, we just progress with the thoughts. So no wonder you shattered. So then we assume the first part's true, so then the second part must be true. So no wonder you shattered. You must have shattered because you couldn't help but self-reflect. That's what it's saying, right? Is in times like these, we can help but self-reflect. So no wonder you shattered. That's basically saying, when times like these, I don't know what the times like these actually are. We never really explored that. We're staying a little cryptic. We cannot help but to self-reflect. Okay, so in whatever this moment is, you can't help but self-reflect. And because you self-reflected, no wonder you shattered into a million pieces. Okay? Of course you did. No wonder you did. When things came crashing down. Again, all that specificity of scene 2, we still don't have. Things came crashing down. What things? What came crashing down? What crashed down? And perhaps, maybe it's not even important what came crashing down, but maybe what's even more important, maybe the more important thing is, why aren't you telling us? Why is this staying a secret? Why aren't we diving into here? What are we trying to hide? And Rose saying, after hearing the we to me critique. I realize how much I did this in my own poetry. I've been correcting it ever since, trying to be honest or more concrete in my communication. And it's not even necessarily a bad thing. It's a common thing. I'm not saying like it doesn't work, but it's just I think it gives us, if you're doing it without realizing it, that could be an indication of everyone has their own like defense mechanisms and things like that. And so it could be something that creeps up when you're about to tackle something kind of sensitive. And so it prevents you from diving in and doing that personal work. So you kind of stay more at the surface level instead of actually trying to see what actually is happening. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here, but there are some indications that we may be hiding some things about what this poem's actually trying to talk about. How else could you see yourself if not broken? So again, there's a lot of projection going on from the speaker. So the speaker is projecting all through here. So no wonder you shattered. How else could you see yourself if not broken? The speaker is projecting. It's like an attempt at empathy, kind of. It's like, oh, this is what people would do, when really we're saying this is what I would do, and I think people would do. So of course you would act like this. It's like trying to like put yourself in the other person's to use position. But we're the danger is you might end up speaking for the other person, and they might not necessarily agree with the conclusions you're reaching. You know what I mean? It's like saying, "Oh, you must have been really sad after you lost the game." And maybe someone was, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're like, Psh, what are you talking about, man? I scored 30 points. I was great. Some people don't care about the team. Some people just care about themselves. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys have ever played like pickup ball or anything like that. So I don't necessarily know if the you and the I are on the same page. You can assume it, maybe, because they're in a relationship, but that I think can be a little bit dangerous. So there's a bit of, I feel like there's some projection going on from the speaker. Projection. And let me know if you see that too. Maybe I'm overthinking it. You can let me know. Do you see that scene as projection from the speaker, or do you see that scene as no accurate for the you? And I, incompetent at best. Very interesting, right? So now, just to keep things a little bit clean, I'm going to be. Let me take away some of these notes because I want to talk about the last quarter of this poem. And yes, pickup. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know where you grew up, Joshua. I mean, I grew up in Philly. I mean, you had the ball. You didn't have a choice. That was me. I was unconsciously doing it as a defense mechanism. Seems like the speakers have a conversation with themselves and trying to invite everyone else into it. Yeah. And I think those times where you bring other people into it, like consciously, and really act to do that, you can run into issues. In some ways, by digging more into the individual, this is again the quote from Viby Francis. I use it a lot, but I think it's really helpful. Is the individual is universal. So instead of working to make sure everyone feels like they can be part of this, no, dive deep into your own experience or the speaker's experience, and other people will follow. How else could you see yourself if not broken? So now we get to this last part, and I, incompetent at best. So the speaker, so now, making assertions about other people, of course you would feel broken. I don't know about that, but this scene, and I, incompetent at best. Now we have some self-deprecation. Because it's interesting, right? You didn't have to say this. You didn't have to say incompetent at best. You could have just said, and I thinking I could make it right. But no, that's not enough. You wanted me to know more. You had to tell me that you felt incompetent at best. Isn't that interesting? Like the things that we decide to include that we didn't necessarily have to. So why did we feel it so necessary to pass along the knowledge that we view ourselves as incompetent at best? Because we could have just said, and I thinking I can make it right. So now we're seeing this is a speaker who is really kind of kicking themselves, thinking I could make it right, only managed to cut myself in the process. But we're so concrete and yet we're so abstract. How did the speaker cut themselves? What did they actually do to themselves? How did the speaker cut themselves? It might have been on the mirror, but this isn't about the mirror. Walking through shards, barefoot in the dark, wrapping my hands around every jagged piece. I love you still. Okay. And then, so we get that conclusion, but I guess if the speaker has been harmed, this relationship that they have with this you is harming them, and they're choosing to love this other person still. Why? What has caused them to make that choice? Does this seem understandable? Because it seems like they made a decision. I feel like this is from Joshua. I feel like the incompetent line further supports the title speaker's self conversation. Yeah, 100%. The you isn't. This poem's not really about the you, right? Peeking to the emotion of the scene. This is really more about the speaker trying to kind of come to grips with things going on. It seems like. Why are we making this choice? So again, I'm gonna kind of wrap up the thing here. The thing that I'm a little bit confused by in this piece is we have the scene. I broke it up again by like scene 1, scene 2, and then a mix of scene 1 and 2 combined right at the end. Um, Scene 2 gets a lot of specific details. Scene 1 gets really, really abstract. I don't even really know where scene 1 is. I don't know where I am. And this is kind of interesting because it's a piece that seems to really want to be grounded in a place based on like the scene 2. You know, the specific details about the mirror falling from the wall and, you know, walking through shards or barefoot in the dark. But then the scene 1 is um, never really grounded. Um, and so that's I think that's a really kind of interesting situation. Like it's a piece that's constantly bouncing between this like really concrete and abstract. Yeah, concrete and abstract, but it's bouncing between being very concrete and specific, and then using that I think to really further the poem and move the poem. But the abstractions end up being things that I think kind of raise a lot of important questions. Speaking of questions, Joshua asked, "Do you think that 'I still love you' refers to the speaker? Because like the 'I still love myself' kind of thing. Am I understanding that right? That'd be interesting. It's a good. To me, it seems to be more about the I and the you. But that again, that whole relationship dynamic between the I and the you is very. There's not actually a whole lot given into the relationship dynamics. Not a whole lot, really. What are your thoughts, guys? Other things that stand out to you? Things you think I missed? Things you think I completely got wrong? Okay. Um, wouldn't that be interesting if it had been more? If that were true? So Josh saying yes, saying that that last line is still, "I love you," still kind of reference to myself. Wouldn't that be interesting if the poem? I'm not saying do this. It would just be an interesting take. Walk through shards, barefoot in the dark, wrapping my hands around every jagged piece. I love myself still. That I think that'd be very interesting. because then that calls into question, that makes that line, and I incompetent at best think I can make it right. You have this moment where like, man, this person really tried hard and it didn't work, but they still love themselves. I think that'd be very interesting. Yeah. Um, Josh was saying, yeah, not a lot of detail elsewhere, which is why it led to this question. And I think that makes sense. Anyways, Joshua, I'm exhausted, so I'm gonna go take a nap. I'm tired. But thank you guys for joining me again. This has been Fine Print, where we take a poem and just kind of analyze it, break it down. We'll be back next Sunday, right around 9 p.m. Thanks to Joshua for hanging out with us. Happy birthday to them once more. And if you're watching this in the future, hello from the past. Thank you for checking out this poem. Be sure to see our other episodes of Fine Print for more poetry analysis. And we'll be back next Sunday at 9 p.m. You guys take care. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon. We'll also be back on Tuesday with the Versus Live right around 9:45 p.m. We'll see you guys later. Take care.